My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter at 10 in the morning on December 23rd. A message in the family group chat from my father. Nora, we all agreed you're not welcome at Christmas Eve tomorrow. Devon has his top investors coming, and your whole corporate drone vibe doesn't fit the aesthetic we need for the engagement party. Do not come. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't cry. I typed 3 words. Okay, have fun. Then I walked to my office, opened my banking portal, and started pulling the pins out of the only thing holding their entire world together. For 10 years, I'd been invisible infrastructure, the silent machine, keeping my father's country club fantasy running. They thought of me as a boring compliance drone, a walking ATM. They had no idea I was a senior financial compliance director who spent her days dismantling fraud for a living. More importantly, they had no idea I legally owned the mansion they were currently decorating for a party I wasn't invited to. I cancelled the mortgage autopay, $3,800 a month, quietly wired for a decade so my father could play Lord of the Manor. I pulled my name off every utility account tied to that address: electric, gas, water. I called the caterer handling tomorrow's engagement gala and revoked the $8,000 deposit, instructing them to demand the balance in cash before a single tray came off the truck. Then I froze every credit card he carried. Cards he thought were his, cards that were actually mine. I leaned back in my chair. 45 minutes. No shouting, no slammed doors. I'd simply turned off the tap. To understand how we got here, you have to go back 10 years, to a December when my father's shipping company collapsed under his own recklessness and the bank moved to foreclose on our family home. I was 28, junior at my firm, watching him drown in a debt he refused to acknowledge. I drove to the house that night and found him hollowed out in his study, my stepmother Renata weeping into a shawl, my half-sister Skylar screaming because her credit card had declined at a boutique. I spread his balance sheets on the coffee table. Then I did something no one expected. I bought the house myself. Quietly, legally, outright. I saved them. I got no thank you. Instead, my father grabbed my arm in the hallway and begged me to keep it secret. Appearances, he said. His associates couldn't know he'd lost everything. So I agreed to disappear into the background. A blind trust, automated transfers, silent infrastructure. And over 10 years, something strange happened. He forgot. He rebuilt the delusion brick by brick until he genuinely believed he still owned that house, lecturing me at Sunday dinners about wealth management while standing on a lawn I paid to maintain. Then, this fall, my sister Skylar came home with a diamond on her hand and a fiancé named Devon trailing behind her. Slick haircut, tailored blazer, a leased sports car in the driveway, and a mouthful of venture capital buzzwords. My father and stepmother didn't evaluate the man. They evaluated his net worth. Within a week, the house had become a command center for a Christmas Eve engagement gala meant to dazzle Devon's investors and cement the family's status in one glittering night. The invoices flooded my inbox. I paid everyone without complaint. I let the machine run. At a Sunday dinner, Devon turned his condescension on me, called compliance work a dead end for people scared of real risk, told me to hand my little retirement fund over to him for real growth. I said nothing. I just listened and filed away every holding company name he bragged about, every routing detail he let slip while trying to humiliate me. A few days later, he cornered me in the library with a glossy pitch deck, asking for a $500,000 investment. I opened the folder, skipped past the marketing slides, and went straight to the numbers. It took less than a minute to see it. 0 real revenue, client acquisition costs 10 times the return, and a cash trail that funneled straight into administrative fees, which was another way of saying his pocket. It was a Ponzi scheme, wearing a blazer. I declined politely. He sneered at me on his way out. That night, I ran a full forensic trace on his companies. Delaware entity, Wyoming shell, an offshore account in the Caymans, laundering his investors' money back to fund his lifestyle. My father was walking his golden girl straight into a criminal enterprise, and he had no idea. Then, 5 days before Christmas, I ran my routine check on the property title, a habit, nothing more, and found a red flag. A second lien had been filed against the house 8 days earlier. $3 million. I hadn't been to a bank. I hadn't signed anything. I downloaded the loan documents and found my name on the signature line, my social security number, my employment history, a forged signature so precise it must have taken weeks of practice. The notary was my father's golf partner, and the destination of the money confirmed everything. $3 million, wired straight into Devon's failing Delaware shell company on December 12th. My father had stolen my identity to bankroll his future son-in-law's Ponzi scheme. That was the moment 10 years of tolerated arrogance turned into something else entirely. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I called my attorneys, froze the title with an emergency legal filing, and spent the next 36 hours building a forensic case file, timestamps, routing numbers, notary metadata, the whole architecture of the fraud, laid out with zero emotion. At midnight on December 22nd, I submitted the entire dossier directly to the FBI's white-collar crime division, flagged for immediate review. Then I waited. I let them keep decorating. I let them polish the crystal and rehearse their toasts, because the higher they climbed before I pulled the foundation out, the harder the fall. So when that text came on the 23rd, banished from my own house so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic, I understood exactly what it was. Fear. My father needed me gone in case an actual investor asked an actual question about the property and the truth slipped out. I gave him the silence he asked for. Okay, have fun. Then, I spent the afternoon quietly severing every financial artery, keeping his fantasy alive. Christmas Eve, 6 in the evening. I watched it unfold through the estate's security cameras, which I still had admin access to, because I still owned the house. 150 guests packed into the foyer, dripping melted snow onto the rugs, while my father blocked the dining room doors to hide the fact that the caterers had already turned around and driven off, because at exactly 6:15, the power grid I'd cut hours earlier finally went dark. Not a storm, not a blown transformer, just absence, exactly where I'd removed myself from the equation. I drove over. The house that used to blaze with warmth was a black shape against a street, still lit up gold, on every other lawn. Inside, 150 of the city's wealthiest people stood shivering in coats, lighting the dark with their phone flashlights, while my father lied about a transformer that didn't exist. My phone had 52 missed calls. I silenced it and walked in with a folder under my arm. I found the center of the room, set the folder down on the glass table, and let my heels do the talking until the whole foyer went quiet. There is no power outage, I said. The grid works fine. I cancelled it, just like I cancelled the catering deposit. I held up the deed. This is not your house. It has one name on it. Mine. I told them the whole story, right there in the dark. The foreclosure, the secret purchase, the decade of silent payments, and the $3 million forgery that funded Devon's engagement ring and Skylar's fairy tale. My father's knees gave out. He folded onto the couch, a man with nothing left to perform. Devon tried to salvage it, tried to spin me as the jealous, unstable relative, disrupting his networking event. I turned the flashlight on my own documents instead. His shell companies, his laundering route, the wire that hit his account the same day my identity was stolen to fund it. The investors didn't need convincing. They backed away from him like he was radioactive. That's when the front doors blew open and federal agents flooded the foyer. I'd given them the coordinates hours earlier. Devon bolted for the kitchen and got tackled into a marble island. My father just held out his wrists, both men left in handcuffs, in front of everyone they'd spent months trying to impress. By December 26th, it was over. Renata and Skylar packed their clothes into trash bags because every asset bought with stolen money had already been seized. They ended up in a cramped rental on the edge of town, pawning designer bags to cover legal fees. Winston and Devon stood before a federal judge in orange jumpsuits, denied bail, facing decades for wire fraud and identity theft. I sold the house within 48 hours to a developer who's tearing it down for condos, and the last tether to any of it disappeared with the closing documents. I used to think my silence was keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was subsidizing their cruelty. They mistook restraint for weakness, mistook a decade of quiet generosity for a permanent right instead of a privilege they'd been given. The moment they pushed me past the edge, they didn't break me. They released me from ever having to protect them again. Never set yourself on fire to keep people warm who complain about the smoke. They'll burn you for comfort and call it your fault when the flames go out. If you liked watching this one collapse, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for the next.